Jericho walked under the gates of the temple, his white robes rustling as his brisk pace took him forward. He glanced up at the stones making the archway and considered the markings on them as he passed. They had been carved with the faith and histories of the temple's priests over countless centuries. He himself had crafted 3 of them. The single opening into the temple's courtyard acted as a holy bulwark against those who would do harm to the faithful of the first true god, Armagon. No enemy of the temple had passed these gates in the time since Jericho had gained his rod and robes. His eyes glanced at a group of black-robed sorcerers, skulking around the south side of the courtyard. His voice was a mutter.
Not that they have to. We knocked down the wall and made them a path straight to the temple's heart.
The creases on Jericho's worn face deepened as he scowled. They had knocked a hole in the southern wall years ago. The new gate let anyone pass. Jericho, thank the one you've returned. Jericho's thoughts jerked back to the now upon hearing his sister's voice. Kira. He took in the sight of her with a practiced eye. She was dressed in the whites of the faithful, though she was not a priestess. The black trim on her sleeves and collar were a statement as to the source of her power. Sorcery. She had been the first, the one who had brought change to the temple. They both had much to regret about that. Jericho wiped the ire from his face as he bowed his bald head.
Kira, it's good to see you again. It's been, what, over a year?
Kira clicked her tongue at him. If you ever visited the damned temple, we would see each other more often. Half his age, and she sounded like one of the ancient nuns who had raised him within the temple walls. It made him smile even wider.
I'm afraid I've been less welcome in recent years, child.
He gave a pained shrug as he bowed his head to her in deference. Kira's voice dropped to a whisper. As if any of us have been welcome as of late. You got my letters? Her eyes were darting around the courtyard. Jericho stiffened and stood straight, his voice tightening.
No, I didn't know any were sent. What have I missed?
It was Kira's turn to scowl. Much. Follow me. He did, and as he walked, she explained. Standing before the door, Jericho gazed at the 2 black robes attempting to block his path.
You know who I am? Stand aside. I would see this child.
They didn't move.
Now.
The Master of the Way has said the girl is not to be disturbed until his return. She is on her vigil. The candles are lit, and the door is sealed. Jericho smiled and opened his robes. Under it was a gold and steel breastplate, scarred with 100 attempts to end his life by those who would do evil. Tied to his hip was a similarly scarred mace of silver and iron, though that was from him dispensing Armagon's justice.
Unseal it, Black Robe.
He showed perfect teeth as he removed the first binding on his weapon.
Or I will. Doors are cheap enough to replace, as are the ones guarding it.
The sorcerer's eyes widened in alarm. Both he and the other backed away with a bow and scurried back into the shadows of the hall. He didn't watch them go. Instead, he opened the door. They had been right. It was magically sealed. Well, it had been magically sealed. The door fell away into splinters as he focused his will, and Armagon answered with power. The room was dark. A single candle lit a face staring into it. A child's face. She couldn't be more than 10 summers old. Her hair was short in a bowl cut, as was the norm of the temple. Her eyes were too large. Her nose and mouth tiny in the way of children. But her gaze wasn't on him. It was on the sword. A blade as large as she was. It did not glow, or pulse with magic, or even spark as most thought a magic blade might. No, this weapon existed, more so than the girl, or the candle, or himself. It was a shard of Armagon's will made real. A sliver of his godliness made manifest and given to a simple girl who had walked leagues from her homeland to bring it home. Jericho covered his mouth to hide his pain.
Far too late to save this cursed place.
Taking a breath, he spoke.
What is your name, girl?
Only then did the child look up and seem to notice his presence.
Renee, sir.
She paused.
I think that's my name. It was. Before.
Her accent was thick, but she spoke slowly and clearly. Jericho stood still as he considered her answer.
Before what, child?
Her eyes seemed far too focused and far at the same time.
Before he told me his. Now it's hard to remember.
Kneeling, Jericho looked deeper into her eyes. He could almost see it. There was something there. Something.
Who? Whose name?
She didn't answer, but something did. From deep behind her eyes.
Armagon.
Jericho's heart almost exploded. Reaching forward, his fingers snuffed the candle as he spoke in a pained gasp.
I must take you away from here. Get your things. It is time to go.
She answered slowly, her eyes watching the smoke drift up from the extinguished candle.
I have nothing. Even the clothes on my back belong to the temple.
He nodded.
The sword, then?
That is not mine either. I just hold it until one worthy comes to take it.
Her eyes locked on his own.
Are you he?
Jericho choked back a sense of horror.
No, I am not worthy, but this place is even less so. Let us take our leave.
The girl nodded, picked up the blade as if she was holding a babe, and followed Jericho. Jericho stared at the gate and the dozen black robes standing between himself and it. His robes were still open and his mace was in hand. Behind him was the girl. He chided himself to use her name.
Renee.
It was so easy to forget these were people, not just pieces on Armagon's chessboard. Then again, he still had never bothered to remember the name of the temple's master. The sorcerer spoke.
Where do you think you're going with her? She is a ward of the temple. She belongs here.
Jericho's steady gaze held judgment.
She belongs here like a shining star belongs in a gutter, warlock. She comes with me,
the master snarled.
Not with that sword. Leave it and take the gutter snipe as you have aptly named her.
He pointed at the blade and the girl focused on that finger as if it was the only thing important she could see. Renee's voice was quiet.
You want the sword? You are worthy?
Jericho answered for the sorcerer.
Yes, Renee. He says he is worthy. Give him the blade.
Stepping past Jericho, Renee lifted the sword toward the sorcerer. She offered it to him, holding the blade as she presented the hilt to him with a hopeful smile.
Please?
The sorcerer's mouth twisted in a dark smile as he gripped the hilt and fell away into ash. He didn't explode, didn't scream. He just collapsed into flakes of wind-borne black specks that swirled across the path leading to the gate and was gone. The sorcerers fell into panic, racing in every direction and leaving a sad little girl still holding a sword. Her voice was quiet.
Oh.
Jericho stepped behind Renee and placed his hands on her shoulders.
I'm sorry, I was wrong. It seems he was not worthy. Shall we discuss Armagon's will in this as we walk?
Renee, drawing the sword back to her chest, looked up at the priest and nodded. They left through the gate. Jericho watched the child and smiled. Given a few years, he had little doubt that she would find the one the sword belonged to. It would just take time, and perhaps a mirror.